Hi, friends. Welcome back to another week of the Recover Your Life podcast. My name is Bridgett, and I'm so glad that you are here to learn together. This week, we are having a conversation around sexuality, and so I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and pause the episode, maybe grab some headphones, or come back later to make sure that you are engaging in this conversation in a way that best honors the little ears around you. Today, I share a conversation with Dr. Christy Bauman, who is an author and psychotherapist that focuses on the female body, sexuality, and theology. Her work has deeply impacted my own life. She is the author of several books, including The Sexually Healthy Woman, Theology of the Womb, Womaneering, Perpetual Calendar, and A Brave Lament, which is also an award-winning documentary about the loss of her son, Brave. Christy's work has helped me step into my own sexual story in a way that honors me, in a way that honors God, in a way that honors others. And I'm so grateful for her conversation today. Guys, before you decide to not listen to this week, can we just have an honest moment together? It is one of my deep prayers that this community would begin to form a generation of good and safe men who knows what it means to step into your own sexual story. And that also includes honoring the sexual stories of the women in your life, the women that you love, your wives, your friends, whoever that may be, that you would be a safe masculine presence in our stories. And so that means holding space to hear how the church has wounded us, how culture has objectified us, and the ways that we're trying to return back to the goodness in which our God created us. And so this is a conversation for us all. Women, would you feel empowered to tell your stories? And men, would you show up with radical courage and kindness to share our stories? Let's dive in. Hi, friends. Welcome back to another week of the Recover Your Life podcast. I am so glad that you're here. And if you've been hanging out with us for a while, you know that this is a place where we want to be men and women who grieve well, rest well, and love well to live the life we dream of. And a part of that is really understanding our own sexual stories and having a lot of kindness and compassion to the places in our own lives where maybe our understanding of sex and sexuality has been damaged or hurt. And so I wanted to have no other than Dr. Christy Bauman on the podcast today to share a conversation about female sexuality and our stories in that process. So, Christy, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. Appreciate it.
I think I have every Bauman book, both yours and your husband's, but I have all of yours right here in front of me. They are the resources that I am sending my girlfriends of like, this is what you need to be reading. To be honest, and also, which I'd love to, as we get into our conversation later, for me, not only the importance of women understanding their sexuality, but the importance of the men in our lives, our romantic partners, our friends, our brothers, like having a beautiful theology of female sexuality, that is not something that is dirty or lustful or bad, but it's actually a really beautiful part of us living in co-creation with men and women in our lives. And so I just wanted to start off a little bit, share a little bit about your work, and then I would love to hear from your perspective what's been, filling your time these days. But you are a therapist who helps men and women walk in their stories of sexual freedom. You have the Christian Counseling Center for Sexual Health and Trauma. I can never get through that sentence and say it all in one mouthful. And yeah, your two favorite books of mine are The Theology of the Womb. Love this so much. Just the understanding our stories of our female bodies, and then The Sexually Healthy Woman. Again, they've been such great resources in my own story I was even thinking about it this morning of my body still feels that I live in a world that's too fast for my female body. Like I have to keep up. I have to keep going. There is no rhythmic to it. Or there is, but it's a very masculine 24-hour cyclical pattern. And my body doesn't work that way. And so even just being able to engage in that story too, of whether our listeners are in a season where they are with a sexual partner and they're sexually active, or they just want to prepare and create a lot of sexual connection in their own story, to engage in that in the future, that'd be a great place to start. So I would just love to know from you, like I've been asking people this question, is what has been mattering to you these days?
Thanks so much for asking. I mean, there's so much there to respond to. First, I think most people get into their career and their research based on their own story, whether they know
Mhm.
that or not. And so my sexuality and my
Mhm.
grief has been such a huge part, and my spirituality, my walk with the
Mhm.
Lord has been such a part of how do I do this, and my femininity, they
Mhm.
all have been part of that intersection. And so we find that in everything that I create or
Mhm.
all of my work. So yeah, that's been a big part for me. And that's what I spend most of my time in. I will say, after 18 years of
Mhm.
being in the therapy room one on one with women, I am retiring from that work.
Good.
And the book I'm putting out basically to give women is
Mhm.
coming out this April,
Yay.
actually 2024, called Her Rites. And it's the
Mm.
6 rites of passage in every female life.
Wow.
And so that's what I've been spending my time doing, is understanding what does it mean for a female to have a birthright?
Yeah.
What is her rite of initiation? What is her rite of exile? What is her rite
Yeah.
of creating? What's her rite of intuition? What's her rite of legacy? And how will
Mm.
she die? And that conversation, I think, is the one I've been having for 18 years with
Yeah.
women. And it's the one I want to leave as I sort of exit the therapy office.
Mhm.
I am doing more intensive work with my husband with couples, and I am doing more group work with women seasonally. And so,
Mhm.
fall, winter, Advent, and spring, I
Beautiful.
am doing these seasonal retreats with women around their bodies, and I'm doing more body
Mhm.
work with women. And that has been really, really fun and explorative and beautiful for where I'm at in my journey and where I'm at in my research, even. So I'm excited. There's a lot of things happening, which feel really great. Yeah.
That's so great. Yeah, I was sad. I know that you were recently in Knoxville, Tennessee, not too far from me, but I had made some other yeses that weekend that didn't allow me to be there. But I got to see pictures online and just celebrated that from afar with the women that were there. I
Yes.
love that
Yes.
you talked about rites of passage. Previously on the podcast, we had a conversation about the importance of rituals with Dr. Amy Davis Abdallah. And so that was a huge part of my college career. She actually created a rite of passage for women of like, how do we mark transitioning into womanhood? Where we had mentors and we had a final ceremony. We wore a gown. We were commissioned in a womanhood by an older woman. I mean, it was completely transformative in my life, which I do think set me up for when I came across your work, that I did have some framework of this is here and this matters. And so one of the rituals that well, actually, you didn't talk about the ritual. I made it a ritual from things that you've shared. In both of your books, you talk about the gray matter and the gold dust dream, which I feel like I tell everybody about because it's so impactful for me. And so I have a bottle of like gold body oil that I've begun as a ritual, that whenever I'm like going on a date, or I live in Nashville now, so that's kind of a new scene to me, that I will actually like bless and anoint my body when I go downtown. So I'm like, hey, I'm actually showing up embodied in my sexuality, and I'm not engaging with dudes that are gross. Like, we're not doing that. But I've been haunted by gold dust from engaging in that. It's so funny. I ended up doing the Women of Desire workshop with Heather and Tara. And one of the things we did was she had us like connect to the dirt. And I pulled dirt out of a planter that I had, and I start rubbing it on my body, and there's chunks of gold in it. And I'm like, what is happening here? And I realized it was from a Christmas planter I got last year. So, right, the logistics of it were that there was like a Christmas bulb that was in there before, but I didn't know. But it was even this marking of like, even what you're growing in healthy sexuality was good. And then I had a situation a couple weeks ago where I was like helping someone like deflate balloons that were from some birthday party, and I went and my hands were covered in gold, and it's just become this really precious moment for me and the Lord after reading that dream of I really participate in that ritual a ton to stay connected, and it's been so impactful. So I'm like, I need to tell Christy this because now I'm haunted by gold dust all the time, and it's so good.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it because gold dust was something, I mean, again, that I write about, that it was this story that happened in Pensacola, Florida. I mean, in my charismatic days where we
Mm-hmm.
were told, like, man, you're going to see the spirit and it's going to show up in gold dust. And that was like
Yeah.
the scene. And it actually was Heather Stringer who brought physical gold dust to my
Wow.
world decades later, where
Yeah.
we're, at this, her birthday party, and she brings gold dust, and I'm like, oh, thank you. Like, this is what
Mhm.
I needed, is to have this tactile thing, because gold dust has been in my dreams. It's been in my spiritual
Yeah.
work. And I think the goodness of us as women giving each other these tools of, like, anoint yourself when you go out,
Mm-hmm.
that your sexuality is going to be claimed and covered, and
Mm-hmm.
your body is going to hold this glory to it, and it's going
Mm-hmm.
to not be tainted. It actually is going to be affirmed in what it was created to be. And
Yeah.
there's a reclamation that we're all walking back into that feels really important. And so I love that you've created this ritual of, like, this is how I'm making this reclamation for
Mm-hmm.
my body and for my story. And I love that gold dust snuck into the dirt of even
Mm-hmm.
that ritual with Heather and Tara.
Yeah.
Like, that is just incredible. And I think that's the work of the female, and
Mm-hmm.
not that the masculine is not invited into that work, for
Correct.
sure. But I do think in our culture that has been masculine run,
Mm-hmm.
from that framework, we just have been going too fast. We've
Mm-hmm.
been going off of that lens, and we haven't settled and rooted into ourselves enough to know, wait a second, that's not the rhythm on which I actually operate best.
Mm-hmm.
And that ritual, that rhythm, the
Mm-hmm.
seasonal, that's where my body actually does its
Yeah.
best work. And that's where I want to come forth from.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'd love to kind of start there in our conversation of the importance of understanding that our bodies carry a story.
Hmm.
So much of your work is understanding like the seasons and the storyline from birth to now of what our bodies have experienced, but also what our feminine bodies have experienced in our own religious culture, our popular culture, our family of origin culture. Can we talk a little bit about that, of like what actually is happening in our bodies based on the life that we've lived up until now?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. And I feel like there's so many places to go. But even
Mhm.
if we start with just female body parts, right?
Yes.
Even if we just start with as simple as our genitalia or
Yeah.
our reproductive system, the fact that the female was born with 4 million, 2 to 4 billion
Yeah.
eggs inside of her, that she is going to ingest, that she's going to use to practice a way of living and
Mm-hmm.
growing, just something in that very essence, like the idea that when we were still in utero, we had the potential to
Mm-hmm.
create unimaginable amounts of life.
Yeah.
Something about just that understanding is very different than the masculine story,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's very different just from a physiological standpoint.
Yeah.
And so I think just taking the female body and saying, oh, she from the very beginning has been different and has been set up to do
Mm-hmm.
something differently. And when we can understand that her organs even are on a cyclical cycle, we have this roadmap and this compass that
Yeah.
then we know how to guide her through the story.
Mm-hmm.
Then storywork comes in. Who did or didn't let you use that compass and that knowing body in your
Mm-hmm.
story? Were there men or women? Was there a mother or father? Was there a
Yeah.
boyfriend or husband who was not
Mm-hmm.
listening or allowing you? Was there a pastor or a church
Mm-hmm.
setting that was not in congruency of, hey, your body was made in the Imago Dei and we need to listen to it?
Mm-hmm.
That's where we start to then meld
Yeah.
the female body and the way it was created in the image of God with then also our storylines.
Yeah. That's beautiful. And having the space to even being able to like put words to that, I think is so important. Of, one of the heart of building the community here is that we would actually craft words that bear witness to each other's stories. because so much of what's unnamed stays stuck. But when we can name it, right, that's even a scriptural narrative, right? When there's naming, then there's life to it, and we acknowledge that it exists. And so there's, how do we show up and say I'm actually worthy of taking up space when so much of our cultural history is that women be small, don't take up space, and do what the man tells you to do. And we get that from all different avenues. And I think the crazy part of doing any sort of somatic work or story work, in congruency with each other, is that there's things that we might not have even been told directly to us or directly experienced in our own story, but because we live in a larger narrative context, our bodies still pick up things of what am I safe here? Am I not safe here? And so one of the languages that we've used on the podcast is what I like to call creating pure body memories, which I know like the psychological term would be a disconfirming experience. But the idea of like, what does it look like for me to participate in the healing of my own story that says, yeah, I've had um, religious wounding, I've had um abuse of some sort, I've had silencing of some sort. And to create reconnection in that place doesn't mean that I'm avoiding it. It means that I'm showing up now with an agency that I wasn't able to have before. And so I think that's just been super important in the work that you've created is it does feel this like you can take a breath and you can be present and you're allowed to have needs and you're allowed to not know what you need yet. Which has just been so helpful in that. Can we talk a little bit about the pace thing, the feminine pace of living in a body that is more seasonal?
Sure. Even the idea of reproduction, which is what you're saying in the sense is that
Mhm,
will our body want to heal itself? Yes,
mhm.
it does.
Yeah.
And how do we know that? And we know that from the cycle. We know
Mhm,
that our uterus in itself, every 28 days, is trying to create a new, right? We know there's a regenerative self
mhm,
in the female body. She's trying to create again and again. And so, because of that, that cycle is telling us something. But even as you said earlier, the male body, it creates very differently. And so,
mhm,
even though, um, men, it's on a 24-hour cycle.
mhm.
That is very different than a 28-day cycle. Men,
Correct.
their hormones can generate in less than 2 hours. So if they get
Mm.
sleep that's interrupted, their bodies can regenerate. Women, they need 6 hours. So
Wow.
just in the 24 hours of when we're getting our sleep at night, women will need 6 hours for their hormones to regenerate and to start again where
Mhm,
they need to start. Men only need 2 hours. So now we're just looking at a
mhm,
physiological difference. The female, it's a longer cycle process, but you also see that bodies want to heal themselves.
mhm,
And so even with the fall, even being currently in the season of fall, what do
mhm,
we see? See leaves falling off of trees. Well, why are they
mhm.
falling off of trees? If leaves stayed on trees, then whenever the water came to the branches from the heart of the tree in the winter, it would break off the branches and it
Yeah,
would
wow.
freeze them. And the branches couldn't have new leaves in the
Mhm,
spring. So it has to shed. Women wish, I mean, we all want to be evergreens, but we're not. We are
mhm.
everbearing.
Yeah.
And being ever-bearing is hard work
Mhm,
because it means we have to cycle through. It means we have to shed our leaves. It means we have to lay there
yeah.
and blanket over under the snow and hibernate. It means we have to wait for that seed to sprout up again in the spring. That entire cycle process is it's not easy.
Mhm,
It requires a ton of waiting and resting and
mhm,
letting go and burying.
mhm,
It takes a lot of discipline to be in that cycle of
mhm.
reproduction.
Absolutely. And being able to reflect or even being able to say, it's funny, I um, have one of my Tennessee papas in my life. He is a marriage and family therapist and a Christian sexologist, and so we have lots of good conversations. And I was processing that when I ovulate, I struggle with like obsessive thoughts that I don't get the rest of the month, and so that progesterone spike, my brain feels like someone cut it open and put a fire in there, and I'm like, this is really hard. And so I wanna fix it of like, "Let me fix it. Let me find the right supplement. Let me do the right thing." And he just was like, "What if you just asked Bridgett what she needed? Like, what if it wasn't this big problem to solve, and what if you just engaged with kindness towards yourself in that of like, okay, my hormones are here." I always kinda joke and say, "Okay, is this my hormones or is this the Holy Spirit?" I'm not quite sure. Maybe a little bit of both. And so having that space of like, we're not problems, even just the cultural narrative, like, oh, women are emotional or she's PMSing or just all these negative things of like, actually this beautiful reproductive cycle in you is a nuisance and you just need to catch up and there's no going slow for you in it. Like, you just have to figure it out and not make you a problem. One of the things I love that you talk about in the Sexually Healthy Woman book is how as adult women we still feel the need to hide tampons of like, "Oh, okay, like this is still dirty. This is still a part of me that's not welcome. This is still a part of me that I have to hide to make other people comfortable or whatever it is the story in that space." And so yeah, just the beginning work of what's happening with me, what storylines am I having, and how do I share that? I think that's a huge place of the masculine feminine dance of the like, it's good for me to have masculine partners, whether that is a romantic partner or a spouse, or whether that's just other really good men in my life that are caring for me. And part of caring for me is caring for my body.
Mhm. Definitely. And I mean, just think about what we're missing out. If all we've done, particularly in the church, but even in society, if all we've
Mm,
done is figure out how to get women to just clean themselves up,
mhm.
like to spend their energy on hiding tampons or cleaning up their blood, so to
Mhm.
speak. Like if
Yeah.
that's what we've taught them is the importance is just get yourself tidy and
Yeah.
clean and look good, then we're
Mhm.
missing out on so much more fullness. We're
Mhm.
missing out on so much more of the heart of what's actually happening in the female body. We're not actually getting into the richness
Yeah.
of all this good work, right? We're just telling the female, oh, just
Yeah.
you're hide yourself and clean her up.
Wow.
Keep her tidy and
Mhm.
just keep her like so that she can show up at a restaurant and look good. But we're not telling her anything about like, hey, what I really want is
Mhm.
what you're feeling deeply inside.
Yeah.
What I really want is you asking, Bridgett, what do you just need right now when your
Mhm.
progesterone's so
Yeah.
because really what we need is women fully alive. Really what we
Yeah.
need is women who know their birthright, who know who they
Mhm.
are, who realize that when they're embodied, that's a world that we want to live in.
Yeah.
And so we're decades behind by just seeing women and training women to tidy up themselves.
Yeah. Uh,
What a boring world that
mhm.
is.
Yeah. And that we both I think that's just one of the most beautiful parts of, um, the I don't know, maybe call it reintegration, maybe just the first integration in my spiritual journey of bringing sexuality back to the table in a way that is beyond just the act of sex, and that it's important and part of my process of growing in Christ's likeness and in community of other people is I don't want to be I want to say it the other way. I want to hold space for others' fullness, and I want people that hold space for my fullness, and I'm not going to participate in places or spaces that do not create space for that. That we have that birthright to ask to say, "Hey, I matter and you matter," right? Cuz I matter, that's the narcissist, right? Is like, "Oh, only my needs matter, you don't matter at all." But when we can create that sacred partnership that's like, "No, there's space for both of us here to show up and be present in this story." One of my favorite. Okay, so I would say out of all the Christy Bauman work, these are my two favorite: Gold Dust, and then this quote has literally changed my life. You say the greatest gift. I want to talk a little bit about partnership and the dirty word of submission, right? The greatest gift the submitted partner gives their other half is to voice and require what they need to remain known. I wish that I could show you a snapshot of my life in the last 3 years and how I have anchored myself in this, in the men in my story, to go, the most honoring thing that I can offer the masculine is to be really, really honest about the cost and the weight of what it's required for them to know me. It has just so radically changed because I think for so much of my religious story, it was the don't be a burden. Like, submit, be quiet, make it really easy. Don't don't ask men questions. Like, you're there to support and encourage. And I of course want the men in my life to feel loved and honored and respected and safe in my story. But I'm sad that the religious context that I grew up in meant the abandonment of feminine safety in that space. And so I think that is one of just the beautiful things of creating space to be known as scary. And I would maybe that's my next question. Like, I don't even know what my question is for you. Just wanted to tell you. Um, how it really is the most honoring thing for everyone in our life when we show up honestly about what our needs are, even if that is uncomfortable for the other people in our life, and specifically maybe the romantic male partners or just the male figures in our life when we're sharing the real cost to come close to our hearts.
Mhm. Oh my gosh. I mean, 5 minutes ago, before we started this podcast interview, I'm telling my husband, look, I need this,
Yeah.
and this is my ask because I need this. And if I don't tell you this
Mhm.
need and I don't actually require it of you, then yes, I might resent you. And that's one thing that will impact our marriage, sure.
Mhm.
But another part of it is that I know you want to love me
Yep.
this way. You want me to feel alive. You want
Mhm.
me to feel fully in my body and fully living out of my dreams. But that
Mhm.
means I have to articulate and ask you to sacrifice certain things so that I can go do those things.
Mhm.
That is hard work, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's hard to require from particularly a partner when they've partnered with you. It's like, man, I thought it
Mhm.
was I kind of went into it thinking it was about just being with a lover, but I'm
Mhm.
like, it's actually the sacrifice to let your partner live their best life.
Yeah.
It's just hard work. And so then when you find it even in friendships, like male
Mhm.
friends who really want to sacrifice to hear what my experience is, or to make
Mhm.
room on the stage for me, or to make a table that's long enough for
Yep.
all of us to come, right? Like,
Mhm.
now we're talking about a place where they're taking my breath away.
Yeah.
And what I truly believe is they long to take my
Mhm.
breath away.
Yeah.
And they're taking their own breath away, which is all of us, our journeys as
Yeah.
humans, right? And so I always go back to Sue Monk Kidd's statement. She says, every woman should take her own breath away once in her life. And I just
Mhm.
human should. But
Yeah.
I do believe that when we're honest in relationship, when we're really honest about what we long for, that is actually helping and giving the roadmap to each other, taking our own breath away.
Yeah.
Because what's required of us
Yeah.
in those moments is mind blowing. When someone is honest about what they
Mhm.
long for from you, and then you see yourself sacrifice and do it, you feel
Mhm.
incredible about yourself.
Yes.
And the intimacy that happens in that moment,
Mhm.
it's life changing. And I do have to say, some of the times the most potent has been around grief.
Yep.
When there is grief and people allow each other into their dirty, chaotic homes, or their broken,
Yep.
tear-stained cheeks, and they let them hold their cheeks and they let them break the dirt to help
Yep.
them bury their dead. There is something
Yep.
that changes in those moments where you just think
Mm-hmm.
like, thank you for letting me be here. And I would be
Mm-hmm.
nowhere else. And I didn't know I could handle being in this moment.
Yep.
And I am taking my breath away.
Mm.
And I am blown away
Yeah.
in that moment by the work of the people
Yep.
and of community is just this.
Mm-hmm.
And we're missing it by pretending and not telling each other what we actually long for.
Yep. Yep.
Whenever we whitewash it, like we're doing such a disservice. We're actually telling the other, I don't believe you can do it. I don't
Mm-hmm.
believe you can actually meet me in this. I
Yep.
don't really want intimacy with you.
Mm. Beautiful. Because that is the question, right? Of the, are you going to show up for me? And one of the things that my best friend says is don't say other people's no for them, right? If I'm going to have intimacy with you, like you said, in any friendship, is I want to know if you're here for me. And that's not fair because instinctually I pull my heart away when I don't have an answer to that question. Or when I can answer that question, right? Because here's the vulnerability piece is while we acknowledge that the only way to connection is to have these honest conversations to say, hey, this is what I need, this is what I long for, this is what I desire, everyone has the right of refusal. And so there is a chance that when we ask, the other person says, no, thank you. But then I end up dishonoring both of our stories when I continue to participate in a place where people don't actually want to be. Right? So yeah, sometimes there is the breaking of, hey, this is what I need. And for us to continue to be in intimate safety with each other, this is what it's going to require from both. And I want to create space for what you need, right? It's not a one-sided pursuit of the need being met. And so there is that grief process too, as we get to learn both. But I think that's how we create communities that are really safe for everybody when everyone has the right to show up and right everyone has the free will to say actually I don't want to participate, and they can go participate in a different community that's going to work for the level of safety and responsibility that they're willing to contribute. But I do want to acknowledge that too is yes, in asking, right? It's that tension of in having that sacred bravery to say, I want to show up for you. This is how I need you to show up for me. There is an option that people say no. So what do we do then, Christy, when someone says, no, thank you. I'm not wanting to come close to you that way. I'm not wanting to care for you that way. And maybe they say that with their words and maybe they say that with their actions. What do we do then?
Well, just the other weekend when I was in Knoxville, I watched Heather Stringer lean over to a woman um, who was wanting to say no to someone and felt a ton
Mm-hmm.
of shame for it. And she grabbed
Yeah.
her hands, her face in her hands, and she said, a boundary can be the most loving thing. And I think in that moment, we grieve the
Yep.
person's boundary and their need to say, no, thank you,
Yep.
or
Yep.
I refuse, or I can't now, or I don't want to. And we grieve that.
Mm-hmm.
And it either opens the door for us to find someone who does want to do that with us, or we in that moment get to belong to ourselves and we get to grieve with ourselves what it has felt like to be rejected or to
Yep.
have someone say
Yep.
no to us.
Mm-hmm.
All of it is grief, but I think how we respond can be loving no matter what, because we can either love ourselves well in that moment and let ourselves grieve because we know our story and we know what that rejection or that no can be for us. And we also can love the other by saying, thank you for your honesty. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I bless you to leave. I hear your no.
Yeah.
And like, I will miss you
Mm-hmm.
and I will not make you. I have done my ask
Yep.
and I release you. You've
Mm-hmm.
said no. And whether that is in marriages,
Mm-hmm.
whether that is in friendships, whether that is in church relationships. We see that all the time. And so while, that requiring is important in intimate relationships, it also sets us up for potentially the greatest heartbreak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it is an invitation to love ourselves.
Absolutely. That's the wonderful risk, right? Is that's the only way that we get to pursue connection. I've been noticing just in my own body that I feel it. I went to a conference last weekend. I think it's probably one of the best ones of my life. But the funny part about that is after the Friday night session, they had us in groups and they asked, turn to your neighbors and tell them like one thing that you learned or, one speaker that was really impactful to you. And I'm with two friends that know me pretty well and then a stranger. And they're, giving their raving reviews about how much they loved it. And I go, well, to be honest, I'm really pissed off and I hate the whole thing. It's like, I am angry, I am sad, I am mad about places and spaces that my body has been in a context similar to this, and I was not given space. And so here I am. My body didn't get to be angry last time. She was silenced last time. So tonight, she's sitting with friends and strangers, and she's really angry. And that's okay. And it was this funny moment because I felt safe with my friends. There was, of course, an experience of a little bit of shame with this stranger of like, I promise I'm not like this all the time, but right now this is how I need to engage in authenticity. And then I came back on Saturday and my body was so different. I felt such capacity to create new friendships, to network, to invite new friends to the podcast, to be beautiful. I was like, I want my hair done. I want to wear these good jeans that I feel good in. And there was just so much space. Because the grieving was present too, that it wasn't one or the other, that I was just able to show up fully myself. So, as we kind of wrap up our time together today, there are 1,000 topics that I know we could talk about, but this is something that I don't even feel like I have a fully formed thought on, but I wanted to get your wisdom and reflection on this. So, one of the things that I have been working through in my own story and the topics I keep coming up with other women in my life too is this idea of reconnecting to the purity and innocence of sharing our bodies. And so for me, taking a more holistic context to that like, yes, that can be in sexual pleasure and sexual activity with a partner, but that also can just be in the like, what does it look like for me to practice sharing my body? So holding a friend while they're crying, or noticing that I have good men in my life, that my body delights in being touched by them in non-sexual ways, or in teaching, young children as they, I spent a season of my life where I spent tons of time with my best friends that had 4 young boys. And so even just being able to like talk about bodies with them or sharing my body with them, of they could ask questions. I have a scar on my chest. And so even allowing them like as young boys to ask questions and to touch, and it for it not to be a shameful thing. I feel like it's showing up in so many areas, but also I think on the other side of not pushing past when our body goes, oop, no, thank you. I don't want to show up in this space. I don't want to hug this person. I don't want to be sexually active with this person. I don't want to share right now. This is not a safe place for me. I've just been thinking about this whole concept of sharing our bodies. Any thoughts on what's happening in that realm and how we can be present and embodied in our bodies?
What I'm struck with is the gift you gave those boys. That feels
Mm-hmm.
really sweet and really beautiful. And again, the importance of that conversation, because it's not talked about very often.
Mm-hmm.
And even in adult friendships, and I can think of a time we would growing up, we would play on rafts in the water. We'd play King of the Mountain, and we'd push
Mm-hmm.
people off, and whoever was the last standing. And
Mm-hmm.
at 40-year-old, I'm playing it with my, guy friends and girlfriends. And then I had to like check in with some people's husbands, some people's wives after, because I was
Yeah.
like, this, I felt fine,
Yep.
but we have to keep the conversation going,
Yep.
because I think we need the touch to keep going. And
Yeah.
because we need that touch to become normalized, and because we all
Mm-hmm.
need that touch to be healthy,
Yeah.
that I
Mm-hmm.
just think it has to be a conversation, and it has to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm all for it. I'm all for intentional, continued conversation around that, because
Yeah.
it's so needed. It's just a
Yeah.
part of sexual health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been having, specifically for me, in a season of not being married yet and having conversations with my girlfriends that are dating of like what's happening in our bodies with men, and being able to show up and say, like, do I actually trust you enough to want to be closer to you, or do I feel like this is expected of me, and what's happening in that space. And I think, even in that, of just continuing to have those types of conversation of like, who are the people in my life that are showing up to care for all of me, and what's happening in the places where I feel myself wanting to pull away too. And so I think that's one of my, just, I so appreciate about your work, is this returning to, you don't have to go learn something else. Like, your body's really smart and already knows it. It's about creating the sacred silence to listen to what it needs to say, what it needs to grow, what it needs for connection and safety. That it's not outside of you, that it is in this place of connecting to God's self and others, where everyone's getting to return to the story that we were meant to live.
I love that, the sacred silence. And I think as much as we do our own story work, and our friends do their own story work, like, we're going to understand our bodies better, and how
Mm-hmm.
they can care for each other, and how they can harm each other. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like those intuitions, and that growth is something that can be so kind to the
Mm-hmm.
other, and so needed. So I,
Yeah.
I love it. I do feel like we're still just on the precipice,
Yeah.
especially adult men and women. I feel like we're just on the precipice of that,
Yeah.
and it's so needed.
Absolutely. Well, as we end our time together, I would love to be able to give people where they can connect with you if they want to learn from you more or work with what you've got going on. How do they find you online?
Yeah, thanks. I think mostly my website, christybauman.com. It'll have all events that I'm doing. Basically, I do those seasonal sacred interruption
Mm.
times. My husband and I do marriage intensives still, and I have a book coming out. And I also, what I'm very excited about is just am going to release an EP album with it. So I'll have 6 songs
Wow.
to go along with the rites of passage. And my
Amazing.
hope is that readers would take it with them to their body workers. So
Yep.
if you were going to get a massage, you would take this with
Wow.
you, and you would use the music as a therapeutic tool to get you into your body work. So
Mm.
that's my goal with this project. So yeah, so I think all that can be found on my website, or my handles at Christy Bauman on Instagram. But yeah, I'm just around. That's what I say.
Yeah.
I'm just around doing some things.
Amazing. Well, is there anything that you haven't said that you want to say before we close?
Oh no, I love the work you're doing. I love the
Mm.
conversation about the body, and I do think that, man, my heart is that we wouldn't stop the conversation just
Mhm.
at trying to end sexism in the church, or trying to
Yeah.
end objectification or patriarchy. I mean, yes, but may that be the bare minimal,
Mhm.
the non-negotiable, right? Like, I I just think, there's so much more to the female, and so many
Mhm.
women have been expended all of their energy and given it to just finding a safe place. And
Mhm.
in that, then they find a safe place finally, and they're so exhausted that they don't know what they think or what they feel, and
Yeah.
they're not even able to practice or try on their own bodies or their own stories to tell what they
Mhm.
know. So I just want longer, wider tables.
Mhm.
That's that. Also, Red Tent Living is another ministry I work with Tracy Johnson, and so looking up that podcast or that blog online is really resourceful for women. You can look
Okay.
at ways to do red tent dinners in your own home to build communities
Wow.
for yourself. Um, so yeah, I
Yeah.
just think spread the word. I am all about the health of the church and the health of the female and the male and our sexual health, our bodies. So let it
Mhm.
be.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you so much for creating space today. Friends, thank you so much for listening. Whether you are a woman listening to this podcast or you are a man listening to this podcast, wanting to grow and continuing to hold sacred space for the women in your life, we pray that this would be a conversation that inspires you to live more connected and free. We'll see you next time on the Recover Your Life podcast.